Good morning. I'm Bob Armstrong, Director of the MIT Energy Initiative, and I'd like to welcome you to this first of two forums on engagement. Both this symposium and the next one hosted by Professor John Fernandez of the Environmental Solutions Initiative at MIT, are being held under the auspices of the Office of the Vice President of Research at MIT, Maria Zuber. With these events, Maria Zuber is continuing MIT's initiatives, such as MIT's 6th Climate Action Symposia, to engage community members around urgent climate and energy issues. You'll hear closing remarks today from Vice President Zuber. Today's symposium looks at engagement with outside organizations, with industry in particular, on climate and energy research. With vignettes of current and recent engagement activities, we're looking to share a small handful of examples of how working with industry has catalyzed progress in the electric power sector, life cycle analysis to inform decarbonization efforts, and fusion energy, to name a few. You'll hear from industry representatives, investors, faculty members, and alumni who've been involved with these projects from different angles. Something you won't hear as much about today, but another kind of engagement that's very important to us is informing public policy through our multidisciplinary, multi-year studies involving teams of faculty, researchers, and students from across the Institute. The most recent of these, the future of energy storage, is currently underway, and when it's completed, our researchers will present findings to policymakers in DC and across the country, as we've done in past studies, including those on personal mobility, nuclear, solar energy, and the electric power systems. While we're trying to pack a lot of information into a pretty tight schedule this morning, we'll have some time for audience questions and answers. So I ask you to scroll down on your screen and enter your questions into the Slido field under the live stream video. Thank you very much for being here. It's wonderful to have so many community members who care deeply about MIT's climate and energy commitments. We're grateful certainly to gather virtually at this time, and we look forward to the time, hopefully not so far in the distant future, when we can make these gatherings in person. Now I'd like to introduce Professor Angela Belcher, who will moderate the first panel, first session. She is the James Mason Crass Professor of Biological Engineering and Material Science and Engineering. She's also head of the Department of Biological Engineering, does a broad range of research in biomaterials, organic interface engineering, synthetic biology, and she's just generally a wonderful scholar, educator, and innovator entrepreneur. Angie, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob, for that very kind introduction. I'm very excited to welcome everyone today for these panels. I think it's going to be very exciting. We're going to have three different topics, and the part that I'm excited about is it's bringing together industrial collaborators with academic collaborators at MIT. And having done this myself for over 15 years at MIT, I really understand the importance of the close intersection and the close collaboration with our researchers and academics at MIT, with industrial collaborators, with the idea of really making an impact, really moving the needle in these particular areas. So I'd like to introduce the panelists in our first topic, which is renewable energy, machine learning for predicting the longevity of offshore wind turbines. We're going to start by having about a 10-minute discussion, and we'll have questions at the end of the three panels. And so our first is Sophia Kokura, who's a senior analyst, performance analyst engineer at Scottish Power, and Kalyan Kalyan, who's a principal research scientist at MIT Lab for Information and Decision Systems. So I'd like to start by asking Kalyan a question on, could you tell us a little bit more about machine learning for this project?
Thank you, Angela. So in this project, we're using machine learning to predict failures for wind turbines, failures of components like drivetrain or controller or converter and items like that. And what that allows for Iberdrola is as we predict these failures far ahead of time, they can schedule repairs, they can pre-replace the components that are likely to fail, and as a result, increase the uptime of the turbines, as in increase the availability of renewable energy, especially from wind turbines. What was very surprising to me when I started this research several years ago, actually, a little bit into the data-driven technology, that turbines do record a lot of data. They record data at a millisecond level, and they record data about vibrations, about the power they're generating, about the heat, temperature and pressure, and several other readings. And these add up to terabytes of data that Iberdrola is recording and monitoring through our wind farm. And then there are several wind farms. So one of the biggest challenges that we are working right now is not only to predict the failure for one turbine, but also how to scale up this technology to use across farms that in Iberdrola's portfolio. So that's the real exciting part about this project.
Well, that does sound really exciting in terms of the scaling. Sophia, could you talk a little bit about how this type of work is valuable to you, and how working with MIT has been, and what the collaboration is like, and what the this approach and technology brings to the table?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Angela. So this project basically enabled us to have machine learning solutions for predictive maintenance for all our renewable energy assets. So one thing that is really good about this project is that it enables us to do this algorithm development dynamically. So we don't get a black box solution by the end of the project, but we're actually building this with the researchers, which is really, really useful for us. So we can tailor it to our needs. And we're actually seeing the code, it's fully transparent, and we're being able to contribute to it. So that's a really, really useful exercise for us, and we're learning a lot with the researchers. The other really, really important thing is that, as Kylian mentioned, the solutions being developed are very flexible and reproducible and scalable. So in a worldwide context, we know that we are in a climate emergency. So we need to decarbonize the energy sector, and that means more and more renewable installed capacity. And in terms of like Iberdrola's and Scottish Power's, so Iberdrola is a parent company, Scottish Power is part of it. So it keeps on growing and getting more and more assets. That is wind turbine assets, solar assets, batteries. So that means more and more data from different types of machines, different types of technologies. Even when we talk about just wind turbines, there are so many different model and data types. So the solutions that we are getting from this MIT project are really like flexible and can be incorporated in different types of assets, and that's really, really useful for us. And as a person who has worked in academia for many years before, in the field of machine learning, actually, I can see that bridging the gap between development and deployment of a product is a very big leap, and the team in MIT are really helping us in actually bridging this gap. Because when I started doing my PhD, I trained one machine learning model and I got a 99% accuracy, and I thought, okay, I solved the problems of wind turbines, I solved climate change, that's perfect. But obviously, as you get introduced to the field of data science, you understand that there are much more challenges in actually deploying those models. So I'm really happy to be working with the guys.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So how is machine learning, Colin, how is machine learning that you've been working on this project, how does it relate back to the other research that you're doing at MIT? So has this connection expanded your research in other areas?
Very significantly. I think, as Sophia pointed out, I think I've been doing machine learning for almost 12 years now, and applied machine learning, not just theoretical machine learning. And what has changed is, historically, we used to get like, oh, here is the data, and we'll go and do something with the data. We'll write a script, and we'll try to, make a presentation or a report. We can predict this, or we can do this, and things like that. And that's where it used to stop. And right around 2015 or 16, things started to switch around, and we started to switch as well. So as we started to make much more open source software, we figured out how if we want to get buy-in and machine learning be used ultimately to predict failures or to have an actionable outcomes, we have to have buy-in from the domain experts early on in the process. So now everything has flipped, which is we now build open source software systems, and we figured out how at the right places you would have to get input from the domain experts, people who are on the ground like Sophia, who know the domain much better than I know. And how do we get them? So we don't want to overwhelm them with software engineering and platforms and code, but we want to figure out how do we give them the right interfaces so they can input their knowledge that actually enables the machine learning to do better. And then as a result, we also get the buy-in from them because ultimately they have produced that result. They're more likely to use it to take actions. So that has informed us throughout our projects. So almost all machine learning, applied machine learning projects right now we actually have that sort of interaction with the domain experts. And we've also started to find that it's the domain experts, ultimately, people who are on the ground and are responsible for taking actions. Those are the right people to interact with if you wanted to take machine learning to sort of deliver value to the society.
So that's actually kind of a perfect lead into my next question, which is to both of you. Are we closer to the promises of machine learning? Are we seeing real value that that people have been hoping for?
I'll answer that, and then I'll let Sophia as well answer. I think broadly, yes, that has been a challenge for machine learning community to deliver value ultimately, and values should be measured by actions taken in the field and outcomes delivered. So in this case, it would be how much availability do we have as a result of this project, availability of renewable energy power on a daily basis. That has been a significant challenge for almost all machine learning community to deliver the promise that we have come to tell everyone. So projects like these have driven it closer. So we are almost there. We have been working for a year and a half. So on this project, I'm really excited to showcase that how much uptime do we have because of this project. So I'll let Sophia speak for that towards that as well.
Thank you, Kalyan. Well, I think the project is now just the start, and it's up to us to make the best out of these models and basically how to use the outputs of machine learning to make decisions. That's now the most important thing. So we're looking forward to actually test it and see how much is the cost reduction and the availability increase in our assets. And reducing the operational cost can have a massive impact on the levelized cost of energy. And especially when we talk about offshore wind turbines, where the logistical implications of going and fixing a turbine are very big, then the logistical and the cost associated with it. So the earlier we know something happens, it's so much useful to operate our assets optimally. So yeah, we're looking forward to actually testing and deploying this and hopefully have value delivered.
That's great. So we have about one more minute. If there's any other closing statements, it really sounds like this has been a very fruitful collaboration where the expertise on both sides have come together to share data and share science and technology that can make a difference. Is there is coming together on this project? What do you think has been the most important combination?
I think the most important combination has been collaboration through open source software and through working with the team on almost regular basis, bi-weekly basis. And I don't know if I think that's the most important thing for us.
I agree with Kalyan, because academia gives you so much more freedom to explore ideas, innovate, that often in industry we don't have that much time. So that collaboration between bridging what we need for our applications and people who have so much more experience in machine learning and innovating, I think bridging those two is really important. And as someone who has worked in both fields, I can really see the value of it.
Well, thank you both very much for speaking to us today, and we all look forward to seeing more of your future collaboration and your future progress.
Thank you.
So I'm pleased to move on to the next speakers in the panel, Energy Systems, Sesame, Holistic Modeling of Pathways to Net Zero Carbon Systems. And we have 3 panelists today. We have Emery Genser, Dan Charney, and Jen Morris. And Dan is the section head of Emerging Energy Sciences at Exxon Mobil. Emery is a research scientist at MIT Energy Initiative, and Jen Morris is a research scientist at MIT and MIT's Joint Program on Science and Policy of Global Change. So welcome. Let's jump right in. Emery, can you tell us about the problems you're trying to address and the Sesame tools?
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela. So we are really in the midst of a huge change in the energy sector. And one of the challenges that we see today is the need to satisfy growing energy demand while simultaneously achieving significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And these emissions are from production, delivery, and consumption of the energy, so the entire value chain. And this one important transformation that we are seeing right now is about the greater convergence of power sectors, transportation, industrial and building sectors, and also intersectoral integration. And to achieve the level of decarbonizations we need for mitigating climate change, actually we really need to take a systems approach and look at the carbon footprint of the energy system as a whole. And to address this challenge, at MIT Energy Initiative, we have developed a novel software, Sesame, which is short for Sustainable Energy Systems Analysis Modeling Environment. And this tool is an online tool developed to explore the impacts of relevant technological, operational, temporal, and regional characteristics of the evolving energy system. And with this platform, we are focusing on accurate estimation of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, techno-economic assessment, as well as the scalability and feasibility of emerging technologies. And as we continue developing Sesame, we are of course using it to analyze many important and contemporary problems. And one recent example is MIT Energy Initiative's Mobility of the Future study. Professor Armstrong mentioned about this study in his opening remarks. And for this study, we have performed environmental impact analysis of various vehicle powertrains and fuel options in collaboration with Joint Program and GEN. And one example was, for example, we try to understand the emissions reduction potential or switching to EVs versus hybrid vehicles and how these results vary across time and across different parts of the US.
Okay, thank you. Jen, can you talk a little bit about your different angle on modeling energy and transitions and how it fits into what we heard about Sesame?
Yes, great. Thanks, Angela. So at the MIT Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change, we develop and use a global energy economic model called EPA, or the Economic Projection and Policy Analysis Model. And so the EPA model takes a big picture, more aggregated view of the energy transition challenge. It represents the world, the whole world in 18 regions and covers all sectors of the economy with a focus on energy, representing many alternative low carbon technologies. And so this model captures global markets, interactions between regions and sectors, including trade and price effects, as well as impacts on GDP. And it's designed to explore future projections of economies, energy, and emissions under different possible scenarios. And we do a lot of scenario development to explore different energy and climate policies. And so this broader view with an economic focus is very complementary to the detailed assessment approach that Emery described. And so while Sesame can assess in great detail alternative technologies and their implications for emissions, EPA focuses on costs and the competition of alternative technologies within a portfolio of options. And we really see great potential in linking these tools. And as Emery mentioned, we first did so within the Mobility of the Future study In that study, projections from EPA on emissions intensity of electricity generation under different policy scenarios were input into Sesame's detailed fleet models to assess emission impacts of electric vehicles. And so we're currently working together to expand the linkages between our models in terms of the types of information that EPA can pass to Sesame and ways that Sesame can inform the assumptions in EPA. And we believe that these linkages can really provide a better insight into the energy transition and the potential for low carbon technologies at scale.
Thank you for telling us about that and also about the integration. Dan, I want to bring you in. So Exxon has sponsored Sesame and EPA as well as Mobility of the Future study. Can you tell us a little bit about your and Exxon's interest in this kind of work and what you think the main benefit is from working with MIT researchers, and particularly the ones that are here today?
Absolutely. Thanks, Angela. So first and foremost, MIT is a world-leading institution with a focus on energy. And as you mentioned, Exxon Mobil is really interested in understanding the energy transition that's obviously underway. Categories like energy storage, future mobility, carbon capture, all of these are critical to understand how the world is going to evolve. And building a little bit on points that both Emre and Jen made, the answer going forward is not necessarily obvious. One of the studies that we've been able to accomplish with Sesame is looking at emissions of power sector as you add more renewables. And it's become very obvious that just adding renewables to the electricity grid doesn't solve the emissions problem by itself. And it's really critical that energy storage help play a role, because turning fossil sources on and off is not the best thing for either efficiency or for emissions. So we've been just delighted to be able to work with the quality people at MIT to study the solutions for the future and help us to promote decarbonization in both an informed and rational way using a very good sound model that we can share with the world.
So, so it sounds like there's a good working relationship back and forth between needs in industry and integration and collaboration with the modeling and other perspectives from the MIT team.
Definitely.
Emory and Jen, can you in class closing minutes talk about the importance in the connection with industry and with Exxon in this case?
Absolutely. Maybe I can start first. I will summarize in just 1 minute. So basically, I think there are really 3 important pieces here. The first one is really understanding the relevant problems. So when you closely collaborate with industry, you can focus on important problems that is contemporary and that you need to develop a solution. The second one is you really understand the challenges to implement a solution. So in academia, we can come up with solutions, but if they are not implementable, they will not be as valuable, especially when we are in climate crisis. And finally, we learn from expertise from R&D in these companies. And in Exxon Mobil, so we are working closely with our colleagues with similar backgrounds and from similar institutions, and we learn from each other. And I think this interaction is really important.
Yes, I would echo what Emory said. These connections with industrial sponsors and Exxon in this case are incredibly valuable. They provide reality checks, inputs into our techno-economic assumptions, and as Emory said, insights into real world challenges and research topics that are particularly relevant for applications. And so these connections and collaborations really help ensure that our work is relevant and can make an impact.
Well, thank you both for, thank you all 3 of you for your exciting research and sharing the importance of the collaboration today. We have one more panel in this section, and that's on nuclear power, solving operational and maintenance problems for the 21st century light water reactors. And I'm pleased to introduce our two panelists for this last topic. It's Jake Jurowitz, and he's managing corporate strategy of Exxon, and Michael Short, associate professor at MIT Nuclear Science and Engineering. So welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to start by asking what the challenges are in materials and longevity, and what brought you two together.
Mike, I'll actually let you take that one.
Sure. Yeah, so there are long-standing multi-decadal challenges in materials reliability for nuclear systems. The one that brought Jake and I together, we affectionately and professionally term CRUD. It's the deposition of corrosion products from elsewhere in the reactor on the nuclear fuel. In essence, things stick where you don't want them to, and that can cause accelerated corrosion. It can cause problems with power management in the reactor, and ultimately it leads to more downtime, less capacity factor. And what brought me into this actually was this problem has been looked at for 50 years since its inception. And it had been a largely empirical approach taken by industry. But when Exxon stepped in, they wanted to take a more science-based approach to saying, well, you know what, this problem's still here. What can you do about it? So Jake, I'd hand it off to you to fill in from Exxon.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think what originally brought Exxon to MIT and the low carbon energy centers was this desire at the executive level and throughout the company to engage in technology development at a much earlier stage than we previously have, and most US utilities historically have. The motivation for this project in particular is, Exxon's known we have for a large nuclear fleet operating in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic. And a lot of our plants have been challenged economically, just based on market design issues and how we compensate, how we oftentimes fail to compensate zero carbon generators in the United States. So it was really very much kind of an all hands on deck approach to how can we keep these plants alive? How can we take a more aggressive approach to finding some solutions to help reduce O&M costs in the plant? And that's what brought us to this specific project, amongst many others.
Thank you. So, Mike, when I think about work in academia, I think about kind of smaller scale materials or reactions that you're making at a bench top, and I also think about how do you balance more of the basic science for the best way to work with a PhD student, and the need in this case to solve a really important problem on an industrial scale. So what do you think about when you're balancing those ideas and working with graduate students? Do you see it as do you see major benefits to a graduate student for seeing it the full spectrum from the basic science to integration into an industrial problem?
Absolutely. I totally agree that as a group leader, I'm always trying to balance inquiry and impact for my students. Inquiry so that they can pursue lofty scientific goals, discover the undiscovered. Impact so they know that their work actually means something to a lot of people and that they're helping society. And it's difficult to find the right combination of project, and sponsor to strike that balance and actually make the student really feel like, wow, I'm contributing both to the field in general and to solving a specific problem. And that's what's been great about this Exxon project is we had to get down to the nitty-gritty about what makes things stick in nuclear reactors. We were doing some things like you mentioned, like making tiny samples of new materials in the lab, testing their stickiness on the atomic scale. But we also built a reactor without the radiation. We call it the CRUD loop. It's specifically for testing and integrated effects as similar to reactor as possible without the radiation. Will these coatings survive in the high temperature, high pressure, aggressive chemistry, fast fluid flow, and boiling heat flux? And for a student to be able to see everything through from a technology readiness level of -7, when you're just making tiny little things in the lab, all the way up to the handoff to industry, it's immensely gratifying, both for the students and for myself.
Thank you. And Jake, you've had some experience with MIT. Was that helpful in making these collaborations, coming back to MIT, and knowing from what you've done and your experience at MIT, was it easier in making these connections between academia and translation?
I think it certainly helped expedite some of the cultural, learning that had to happen on both sides of the house, particularly for Exxon. It was easier to help. It was easier to help navigate through. Here are the kinds of projects, the kinds of PIs, the kind of relationship that Exxon should try to strike with MIT, and it was easier to know, knowing Mike Short and a lot of the other, MIT professors across the institute and across MIT. It was easier to strike up, fruitful conversations and project opportunities. But I think in particular, it made it easier to relate to the grad students and the PhD students and the research scientists who are working on the project directly, underneath the professors. Having been in that role before, I think it very quickly helped resonate with them because they got to see directly the connection to industry as opposed to just putting out another academic paper. The interaction was much more consistent, much more fluid for seeing how the work they're doing in the lab, which sometimes you kind of lose track of reality when you're a student in the lab, to where it's actually applicable in industry and how much how valuable the work and all the hours in the lab really can be. So I think it was really strong motivating factor for everyone.
That sounds great. I definitely know with my own students when they can see an application that can make an impact on the world on a short time scale, even a long time scale, it really drives the excitement and the motivation for the project. Is this also, Mike? Is this also a good recruitment tool, or is this also a good way of helping students think through and navigate future careers, thinking about academia and think about industry and maybe even the connection between them?
Absolutely, because I think there ought to be more connections between them. That's the whole idea of this session, and allowing students to have frequent primary contact with an industrial sponsor. See that not only are there not just first authors on the papers, but on the patents that we're racing towards commercialization for these things. It's an enormous motivator. It gives the students a lot of latitude to explore potential career paths, who they want to work with, what they want to do with their lives. I'd like to think that I would like to think, I don't know, that we could solve any problem that we set our minds to. But the real question is, what problem do you choose to set your minds to? And seeing problems like this, where you can see, if I solve this scientific issue here, then there's someone waiting immediately to snap it up and make more carbon-free power. I can't think of a bigger motivator for someone who wants to solve the climate change problem. And I see that with our students, that they're lead authors on the papers, they're lead authors on the patents, they're front and center whenever we talk about these problems. And it's great.
Well, we have just 2 minutes left on this, so maybe this question needs more than 2 minutes, but it's pretty fascinating that that the two of you coming together were looking at a problem that existed for 40 or 50 years and have made an immense amount of progress on it over a short period of time. Do you think that is from the collaboration, or is it also a combination of the collaboration and the timing is right?
I'm interested in what you're going to say to this, Mike. I would say it's kind of a combination of factors. It's always a bit of a combination of timing, motivation, inspiration. All that you're building, you're always standing on the shoulders of giants of an immense amount of research that's been done in decades past. This specific project kind of came about originally through another professor, Jacopo Bongiorno, who was submitting an ARPA-E proposal that we got an early look at that was built on a lot of background research that Mike and Jacopo and others had been doing with other industrial sponsors, and it threw some back and forth in iteration, and we kind of massaged the scope and the key factors a little bit. We landed on the project that we did, and then Mike, I know you took some interesting inspiration also globally as you progressed in the research and development.
Absolutely. I'd say it's not like industry hadn't been tackling this problem. I mean, a lot of smart people had spent a lot of time trying to stop the formation of crud. But what you do in industry when like some of the previous panelists said, you don't have time to delve into the science, is you try the quick solutions first. And if those don't work, you try the next less quick solution. And in this case, we continued and continued and continued. Eventually, we just had to ask the most fundamental question: what makes things sticky in nuclear reactors? And at that point, you delve well into the realm of fundamental science. I mean, the nucleus for this project was one of my students and I staring at an equation that was 50 years old saying, let's exploit that difference of variables in a numerator. Like it actually came down to exploitation of a pair of variables. But in the end, once we realized, okay, now we've got an angle to be constantly pulled and refocused by Exxon to focus eyes on the prize. The goal is to get a technology out there. The papers naturally evolved from that, but it was so great to sort of have always the refocusing from industry to make impact. That was critical throughout the whole way. And honestly, it helped speed the progress of the research as well.
Well, thank you. So I actually have a lot of hope after hearing all three of those examples of really powerful collaborations with the whole idea of wanting to make an impact on the world and how can we work together to have do that in the most efficient and fastest way. So I'd like to thank everyone for contributing today, and most of all, I'd like to thank you for your research on such important topics. So if you want to put some questions into the chat, you can go ahead and type those in now. And I'll start with a question about Sesame. And the question is, how does one include all costs of offshore wind, including connections to the grid, in comparing with building solar and storage and additional benefits?
So yeah, when we compare any alternative, we are really including all the costs. So and I can start with an example from emissions. So when you compare EVs with hybrids, for example, you cannot only look into tailpipe emissions. You really need to understand how you produce electricity, what the total emissions, all the way to driving that car. And similarly, when you do a cost analysis, you need to include all the components that goes in. So if it's an offshore wind, then you need to take into account the distance from the shore and what will be the transmission line costs, so on and so forth. So basically, what the type of analysis we are doing captures all components in terms of cost and emissions to be able to have apples to apples comparison.
Yeah, and there's also a visual output, as Emery was saying, of all the variables. And so the person that's asking the question and wants to make a comparison can see the impact of the choices that are made by the individual. So you can see what really matters for the cost or the emissions compared to the other variables.
Thank you. So another question is about data machine learning comparison between that was figured out, comparing that with learning from an experienced person directly.
I can answer that question a little bit. I think when we process the data sources, historically what we had been doing is just automating that process, trying to do as much automation. Maybe this signal in this frequency band is important, and that's how we should do it. Process it and use it for machine learning, and it was very accuracy driven. How accurate is a predictive model? What we are realizing is that the experts, domain experts, have that knowledge. They know when it's a vibration sensor in a particular signal, what sort of band we should be watching for an anomaly. So we are now collecting that kind of input through our software interfaces from the experts. So that has been the driver, and that has resulted in a significant change in how we approach machine learning for these problems.
Thank you. Does anyone else have want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so I think this is a very important question, not only for machine learning, but in general for modeling. Because in modeling, if you don't understand the physics, you can build models that will generate some results, but how to interpret these results will be the key here. And if you know about the physics, either for like the applications that Kalyan mentioned, or for applications that we are tackling in Sesame, actually you can really improve these models, and you can specifically find data sets and find relationships that will help you get the insights that you are interested in. So that's also what exactly we are doing. So we are in Sesame modeling, we are using like process simulations, real world data, so on and so forth, to enhance our analysis and our modeling expertise.
Thank you. The next question I think would be for Jen. It's what policy was the worst among the EPA scenarios?
Well, we run a wide range of policies, and the worst tends to be the no policy, business as usual scenario, where there's a very limited action taken in terms of emission mitigation or policies for low carbon technologies. As expected, that type of scenario results in a world that continues use of fossil energy sources. And then, you can see how that translates into emissions and emissions intensity, and you can look at how that would impact the grid and the use of electric vehicles. So if you're pushing electric vehicles, but you're not also decarbonizing the electricity grid, then you're not really solving the problem if your electric vehicles are powered by coal generation. So that's an example, but yeah, we explore a wide range of scenarios. And of course, those that involve policy that reduce emissions are fare better.
Thank you. There's another question around Sesame, and the person said their aim is to shape technology, clean energy, and storage so they could optimally contribute to global decarbonization. Are Sesame and other simulators available to outsiders to gain feedback about evolving designs?
Yes, with Sesame tool, we are trying to build an open access platform. So it will be open to public, and also it will be open to decision makers, policy makers, to be able to exactly answer these questions. So we are currently working hard to make sure that it is bulletproof and it's ready for public use. We are almost there, but not quite.
We do also have a publicly available version of the EPA model that some people have been ambitious enough to take on and try to run and understand. An example is like the Bank of Canada, and we usually have some interactions with them, and it can evolve into collaborations that can be quite fruitful.
One more question about Sesame and EPA is, can the two of you say something about comparison to other models like Markle times, NIMS? Can you do a comparison to some of the other models that exist for simulation?
Jen, do you want to start? Because I think the direct comparison is with EPA, and then I can complement.
Yeah, I guess I would say what we were looking to do with Sesame was to find the spot where we thought that there was a gap, and that was having a model that combines emissions of the energy system, all of the energy system, or as much of it as we could get into it, along with the techno-economic assessment of those technologies, so that we could really understand how to most efficiently and effectively decarbonize the system. And so there's no other model out there right now that does what we want Sesame to do. So Emre, if you want to take the comparison with the NEMS or Reeds or Markle or any other models, go ahead.
Yes, so the main difference is we have a very, very high resolution technology presence and technology representation, which is one of the key areas that we see as the solution for climate change mitigation, because we need technology, and MIT is very strong in technology development. So we wanted to capture that in very detailed manner. But of course, Sesame is not the only model that can solve all the problems or can be used to make all the decisions. So that's why we are working with EPA model and with more like scenario analysis tools that takes longer time horizons and also do projections for different policy measures. And here, I don't think there is, as Dan mentioned, there is not a single tool that is exactly doing what Sesame is doing, but Sesame is designed to be a complementary tool. Wherever we see a gap, we want to make sure that we can complement by Sesame. But Jen, I think you should chime in here.
Yeah, so on our end, compared to some of those other models you mentioned, like Markal and Reed's, those are energy sector models that focus on a particular piece of the economy, whether it's the electric power sector or more broad energy sector. And so EPA is really an economy-wide model where we're capturing all of the sectors of the economy as well as the globe and in multiple regions. And so interactions between sectors and regions, which gives kind of the full broader picture and how, you know, electricity interacts with transportation or industry, and the interactions in terms of the impacts on the prices of fuels, of electricity and other things, including even, you know, agriculture, and more broad than a lot of these energy specific models. So it's kind of this bigger picture that allows a broader view of how you know, economies might progress over time. So it's really well suited for these long range scenarios that can be fed into a lot of these other types of models like Sesame. We also do connect with models like Reed's, but it's the bigger picture view that's capturing the global picture and key interactions between sectors.
Thank you. We have more questions on Sesame. We might come back to it, but I want to switch to nuclear for a minute. And so this might go to Mike and Jake. It says, regarding the longevity of nuclear plants, what other areas is MIT investigating regarding neutron embrittlement, concrete, cable conditions, monitoring, and containment?
Yeah, you just named quite a few of them. So for example, other aspects of the Exxon project were preventing the ingress of hydrogen into nuclear fuel to maintain its longevity, as well as increasing what's called critical heat flux, or the total amount of heat that the nuclear fuel can output before you reach problems with heat removal due to film boiling. We also have some neat machine learning thrusts. We've got one of our co-PIs, Matteo Bucci, has been looking at how can you use readings from elsewhere in a plant, let's say outside of the core, to infer what's going on inside the core. So like other panelists were saying about, you're collecting terabytes of data on these wind turbines, what can we do with it? Same thing, nuclear plants are instrumented out the wazoo. And there is probably a lot of information to be gained from a flow sensor on one side that can tell you about the temperature on another side. It's just a matter of discovering those correlations. So we have everything from high fidelity neutronics modeling to materials reliability, to new models of regulation for fission and soon fusion power plants, and the list goes on.
Thank you. So this is a question that could be for anyone in the panel. It's industry versus academia. Where will the most impactful research emerge in the next decade? And so the answer might be both, but does anyone have any comments on that?
Actually, I go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Yeah, I could start. I'd say using the CRUD problem as an archetype for the best problems to solve. I think industry with academia, if with industry's help, if academia can help identify problems that have been lingering for decades, that have been constant roadblocks for which, instead of solving them, mitigation efforts are undertaken. These seem to be lower hanging fruit, something where the nature of research in academia can make a huge impact in industry very quickly.
Yeah, I was actually going to say something relatively similar. I think that having academia and industry work together could be critically important for a couple of reasons. People in industry are very familiar with the problems of operating some real world system. And oftentimes people have been in that industry for decades and have lost their cold eyes at looking at a problem for so long. And where academia comes in, you have all kinds of energetic people that are very intelligent, that are really eager to solve really important problems, and they bring a cold eyes and an active creativity and and curiosity to solving real world problems that's just critical.
And I think we are really in, we don't have enough time to actually solve this problem. I think we are really in a hurry to solve the climate change issue. And so everybody should work together. And I think there are like brilliant people everywhere. So if we can only tackle this problem if we work together.
That brings up a next question, a similar question. And so it looks like you were getting ready to speak, Jake, so I'll let you have the first chance at answering this one. It says, do you think the acceleration of the timeline to get to net zero, do you think it has an impact on your collaboration and your engagement styles?
I would say definitely. I would say I hope so. And I was going to actually to say something a little bit, not necessarily controversial, but a little bit less like, oh, kumbaya, like we should all work together. We should all work together. But I would actually add, from my experience in engaging in industrial sponsored research with MIT for the last 5-6 years, as well as other academic institutions, labs, startups, other big industry vendors, I think there is a lot more that could be done on both sides to really expedite the level of collaboration that's going on. At the end of the day, it really is going to be industry that will bring a lot of these new technologies to market, both incumbents and startups. And I think it's critical of our academic institutions like MIT, given the strict timeline that we're on to decarbonize the global economy, to really find ways of expediting paths to market. I think we need to kind of redefine some of our KPIs and our definition of success of what is the purpose of an academic institution like MIT. MIT is really born and bred in industry, industry motivated, industry sponsored research and development. But I think there's more that can be done just given the evolution of how the venture capital system and the startup community and the innovation ecosystem has really evolved and developed over the last 20 years. And there's a lot of big guns that are starting to get pointed towards climate problems and climate tech just in the last 6 months. I'm sure a lot of the folks on this call and in this panel have been following some of the activity that's been happening. So I would just say, like, while I think it's been good and we're making progress, I think we really need to expedite that progress.
Well, that was a fantastic summary. Does any of our academic collaborators want to take on that question in terms of the accelerated timeline and how that might have impacted the way that we collaborate or work together?
I could, sure. So yeah, I'd say from the other side of the fence, I 100% agree with what Jake says. Is I think that, and ultimately the mission of MIT is for the betterment of society. Everything we do is to make people's lives better. It's not, there is for the love of science, but again, it's what you choose to do. So we at MIT produce products, models, technologies, and we try and push them into the real world. But as anyone who knows who's tried, you can't push a string. It's somebody has to be there pulling it. And that's where industry comes in, is they know the problems, they know the markets, but there also has to be something to pull on the other end of the string. And so making more of these connections in a concerted manner with new funding models, new public-private partnerships, new industry-academia partnerships is critical to making impact and keeping Boston out of the water by 2050.
Well, I think we're ready to wrap up this session. It was an amazing panel. Thank you so much for contributing and the collaboration together. And I didn't get to take everyone's questions, but there were more questions around Sesame. And maybe we can get those questions answered online. So I'd like to give a big round of applause to my panel. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the next session. The moderator is Professor Ann White, professor and head of MIT Nuclear Science and Engineering, also a fantastic scholar and leader and a great partner at MIT. So Ann.
Thank you so much, Angie, for the very warm introduction. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. This very next session is exciting. It is about cooperating on research for next generation technologies. It's a pleasure to be moderating 2 panels in this session, one on solar energy research and one on fusion energy collaborations. There will be 20 minutes each for the panels, followed by a 20-minute combined Q&A session. We will end our session very promptly at 12:55 for closing remarks by Professor Maria Zuber. Our first panel on solar energy research features the speakers Miles Barr, co-founder and chief technology officer of Ubiquitous Energy, Vladimir Bulovic, the Fariborz Masih Chair in Emerging Technology, Professor, MIT Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, Joel Jean, co-founder, Swift Solar, Massimiliano Max Pieri, Clean Tech Director, Eni Next, Tim Swagger, John D. MacArthur Professor of Chemistry at MIT. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Max, let's start with you. The Solar Frontier Center, or SFC, is one of the pillars of any cooperation with MIT, and the SFC dates back to 2008. Could you tell us a little bit about how SFC research has evolved over time and some recent progress?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the introduction. And indeed, the Solar Frontier Center is one of the pillars of the cooperation with MIT, and it dates back to the very beginning of our cooperation with MIT. We started SFC because we wanted to tackle a wide range of solar opportunities, and we felt the need to team up with a leading research institution like MIT. Up to now, we have carried out around 25 projects within the Solar Frontier Center, and I would say that the research with SFC has significantly evolved over time, both in the scope and also in the nature of the projects. Initially, the scope was very, very broad. Explore everything beyond silicon, polymers, quantum dots, solar concentrators, parabolic concentrators. Over time, we decided to narrow down the focus of our research, and currently we are focusing on a few technological areas, perovskites and polymers. But also the nature of the projects that we are carrying out within SPC has changed. At the beginning, we focused more on early stage research. Now we are going more and more into technology deployment. A great example is the photovoltaic flagship project that we are doing with Vladimir and Jeremiah Muara, which is about developing scalable printing and coating processes and materials for lightweight and flexible photovoltaics. So I would say very important part of our cooperation with MIT, both in terms of financial commitment or also in terms of the human resources that we put, work that we put into this effort.
Thanks very much, Max. Vladimir, let me come to you. Could you please tell us a little bit about how this partnership has benefited both Eni and MIT?
Oh, absolutely. We have at MIT dramatically benefited from the relationship. There are over 500 student postdoc years provided for by Eni during the lifetime of the existence of the Solar Frontier Center. There are hundreds of research papers that came out of this. And there are insights that our community has gained in that process that led us to start startup companies. Ubiquitous Energy and Swift Solar, led by Miles Barr and Joel Jean, are just two examples. I'm delighted they are able to join us today so that they can tell you even more about their particular ways of learning through the Solar Frontier Center and then taking that knowledge out. Solar Frontier Center also informed us in 2000 and, just a few years ago, let's say, when we published the Future of Solar study, where we looked at our knowledge base gained through the Solar Frontier Center. And we were actually generating that solar study at a cusp of the solar development. We were able, though, through the understanding of what we learned through the Solar Frontier Center and other knowledge around it, where the solar is going. And we're able to actually encapsulate that in a study that still is relevant today. I would say in so many ways that one thing that I would emphasize is a commitment and steadfast commitment of partnership between ENI and MIT. It is that long-term relationship that allowed us to understand each other's needs and allow us to evolve at MIT our focus. So to be more relevant for the E&I's final goals, and on our end, be able to adjust our fundamental research versus more applied research ratio, hence leading to the present state of the project, which is very much looking forward to the ways of scaling up ideas beyond just the labs.
Thanks very much for that. As Vladimir mentioned, Joel and Miles, you're both former MIT PhD students at the Solar Frontier Center, and you've each launched spin-out companies. Joel, you founded Swift Solar, Miles, Ubiquitous Energy. Can you let us know a little bit more about that process and how being a part of Mighty played a role? Joel, how about let's start with you and then we'll go to Miles.
Yeah, sure. So at Swift Solar, we're working on commercializing efficient and lightweight solar based on perovskite materials. So I guess you're asking about kind of connecting the dots looking backward. So I think a few experiences stand out from MIT. I did my PhD work on new solar technologies, like anything from quantum dots to organics and perovskites. And I think that technical experience supported my work at Swift, even things as simple as knowing how to maintain a glove box or what equipment vendors are good to work with. I mean, Swift isn't directly based on technologies that we developed in the Solar Frontier Center, but its seeds can kind of be traced back to partly to an NE project where we made these super thin and lightweight solar cells and put them on a soap bubble, right? Which is kind of useless, but it really did capture people's imagination and made me think deeply about lightweight solar and what it would take to actually make it real. I actually also spent a couple years at Mighty. We're writing this future solar study with Vladimir and many others. And then after my PhD, helped launch and recruit team members for this Tata MIT Grid Edge Solar program, which was really focused on solar applications in developing countries in India. It was kind of a quasi startups within MIT. And I think those two experiences really gave me a chance to learn about some of the big picture questions around solar economics and policy, and really learn how to build a team and manage, even manage finances. And I think looking back, that's actually, those things have been more important than my lab work for charting Swift strategy. And I think one final dot there is actually at MIT, I was part of a climate action group called Fossil Free at MIT. And we actually were pushing back against fossil fuel funded disinformation around climate change. And, as much as that might sound anti-any, I think that's actually aligned with MIT and NE's goal of helping fix climate. So NE's like supporting next gen solar and fusion work because they think it's important for climate. Obviously that's helped MIT spin out some great startups, but in the end, I think it still comes down to making these big capital investments in scaling and in deploying clean energy. So I just hope they keep moving in the right direction.
Thanks for that. Miles, let's come to you. Maybe a little bit about the process of spinning out the company and connections where you feel Mighty played a role.
Yeah, sure. So at Ubiquitous Energy, as our name implies, our goal is to put solar everywhere. We want to find ways of deploying solar on everyday products, everyday surfaces all around us. And the origins of that actually started during my PhD at MIT. And I was really fortunate to actually be one of those first projects with the NEMIT Solar Frontier Center back in 2008. At the time, we developed a way of putting solar cells on any surface. So we started out by demonstrating that on paper. We literally made a solar cell on a sheet of paper. And we unveiled that actually in 2010, right around, I think there was a public dedication of the Solar Frontier Center. And the research got a lot of attention. And that was really exciting. That I would say kind of kicked off my own career in solar energy. Through the Solar Frontier Center, I had the opportunity to work pretty closely with industry, with NE. We had researchers come into our lab at MIT, and we made solar cells in our lab. I had the opportunity to go to Novara at their research center, test solar cells, work with their researchers to kind of optimize our technology. And also was fortunate to participate in some of the steering committee meetings with the PIs at NE. And so all of that experience, I think, was really valuable for me personally in seeing how the industry was kind of informing where the technology should go. And so, really setting metrics that were relevant for commercialization, relevant for deployment. We went and we demonstrated these cells, to the leadership of MIT, and that was really exciting. all that work inspired me to start a career to commercialize new solar technologies. And I was really inspired by this theme of solar everywhere. And that was what was kind of the origins of ubiquitous energy. The MIT ecosystem really supported that, learning how to start a company, how to raise money for a company, build a business plan, and then the technical training and the kind of industry lens that the NE Solar Frontiers Center of Research gave really helped, I think, craft that in a way that was going to be commercially viable. And so we're still at it today. We are making transparent solar today. These are solar cells you can see through. You can put them on window glass, you can put them on consumer electronics. They generate electricity from the sun just like normal solar, but you don't see them. And so in our view, this allows us to open up lots more surface area for solar energy generation. And this really all started back in 2008 when the Solar Frontier Center started.
Thanks so much, Joel and Miles. Tim, let me come to you and ask a bit of a big picture question. How can these industrial points of view and this engagement really enrich research at a university?
Yeah, well, in chemistry, we're in a little basic science cocoon, and it's always important that you reach out and you see the greater world. And I think MIT has a history of bringing companies in, and certainly MIT has been a great vehicle for that enlighten companies, that tell us about the future and what they see and what they can do. So helping scientists to identify the future and where they can make the most impact is really important. I would say in the case of NE, they've brought this to a whole new level of engagement with us and collaboration, basically through things that Vladimir emphasized, a long-term relationship, getting to know personal relationships where we go back and forth and meet each other. And that's been just incredibly valuable. And the framework of the Solar Frontiers Center has really helped, to steward that really, really nicely. And so, a couple places where I would say there have been really profound impact for me. One has been in the organic photovoltaic area, where people are making complicated polymers. There are many efforts in China where they're making insanely complicated polymers that are not realistic to be commercialized. I mean, they're setting records, but in talking with any scientist, in particular Ricardo Poe, he had essentially come up with ways to quantitate how to what he called synthetic complexity, where you kind of do trade-offs between efficiency and the complexity of how you make things and the costs associated. And he came up with a very fundamental, nice rubric on how to actually quantify this. And I was so impressed. I was an editor for journal Macromolecules at the time, and I convinced him to write a perspective article to get that out to the entire world. And so that was a place where this collaboration actually went out to do good for the planet. And that's a very highly cited article. It's something that is caused us to rethink how we do synthesis and come up with some new reactions and new materials. And in fact, is through a flagship program right now with NE, we're evaluating one of them. Another place where they've really helped, NE had started, kind of independent of MIT, an effort on solar concentrators, and they wanted to look more broadly. They actually have some outstanding technology in that. And we make polymers that are used in sensors, and one of the ways we do that is to essentially capture light and transport the energy around to create signal gains. And the same method came to us, like, we can use this in solar concentrators. So again, they helped us to kind of see a application of some physics in a new area that we hadn't seen before. So this collaboration has really been inspiring. I'm sure there are others that many my colleagues could talk about, but that's the way I've seen it really impact basic science.
And if I can add to Tim's works, I have known Tim now for 20 years, and I'm an electrical engineer. Why would electrical engineers spend time with chemists? Well, it's programs like this. It is programs like the NE program that thrust us upon each other and make us realize that combined knowledge can lead us to a higher level of appreciation of what technology can deliver than what we can do alone. So again, I commend NE for giving us a chance to build these partnerships throughout MIT. There are on the order of 25, 30 professors that participated in the span of the program, and they span, if I'm going to make a guess, about 10 different departments. So that is what the program allowed us to do. We even have pooled the resources in the very beginning of the program to build a central facility that is the shared experimental facility, initially in building 13, now in building 12, that is providing for the nanomaterials development and solar testing. Anyone can use it. And indeed, hundreds of people, not just in the program, but across MIT, have used the facility to get their work done. Again, thanks to Annie. So I'm tremendously grateful for the chance that we had the chance to encounter each other back in 2007, the year before we started the program in March 2008. And every year we go to Nevada or Milano and go ahead and spend time asking questions of our colleagues. We spend about 3 days every year. And I try to identify what are the next set of opportunities. Those are incredibly valuable times to meet. Having a chance to welcome them back at MIT, that happens throughout the year as well. Max is a permanent fixture at MIT. He actually lives here. He's a permanent conduit to E&I. But beyond him, many of his colleagues do stop by. Some of them spend time in our labs synthesizing new chemicals. Some of them come by to learn about the latest thing we've done and to give us advice on the things that they would care about and to reformate their own thinking and our own thinking. So that's what a really good relationship is about, recognizing the value of each other as equals and then recognizing the ways to connect at a different level that none of us alone would be able to deliver on our own.
That's really inspiring. Let me actually come to Max and talk a little bit more about this joint effort. Max, do you want to say a few words about how these continuous interactions help keep things fresh for you at NE?
Yes, interaction is crucial because it's just by joining forces between the researchers of E&I and the researchers of MIT that we achieve the goals that we want to achieve. I really miss the time before the pandemics when we could have workshops in Italy, which were an incredible opportunity for us to exchange ideas, also to plan the future work that we would do together. So I would say that engagement is the secret for success for the cooperation to really work out. But if I can add also something to the nice words that Vladimir was saying, also the cooperation with MIT was also very important for us, not only for the research that we did with MIT, but also because if we decided at some point also to establish ENINX, our corporate venture capital vehicle here in Boston, as we did, that is in large part due to our cooperation with MIT, because we wanted to leverage on our network and on our connection with MIT. And out of the 3 first investments that we did, 2 of them are actually MIT spin-outs. So there's an addition to the cooperation that we really appreciate.
This is fantastic. We've only got about 2 minutes left until the beginning of the fusion panel. So I'll open it up to the panelists. If anyone wants to say maybe just something quickly about Horizons, what do you see coming up next?
I will just show you a couple of short demos. This is the state of the art of lightweight flexible solar cells. Simply a layer of active material on a piece of plastic. This is fairly good. It's already lighter than a piece of silicon. But an even cooler thing is this. This is a piece of fabric with a solar cell on it. Weighs 50 to 100 times less than a typical silicon solar panel per unit area. Efficiency is not quite there yet, but we have very rational ways to bring it up to match silicon, maybe even exceed it using perovskites, for example. This is where Horizons are taking us thanks to the E&I interactions.
Thank you so much for that, Vladimir. I think that's a perfect place to end, and to give me just a moment to thank all of you, Miles, Vladimir, Joel, Max, Tim, thank you so much. It's time now to go ahead and start our fusion panel. I'll remind the audience that we will have a combined Q&A session at the end for both panels. So on our second panel, Fusion Energy Collaborations, we have Bob Mumgard, the CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems, Max Pieri again, a Clean Tech Director at NE Next, Libby Wayman, Investor, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and Dennis White, Hitachi America Professor of Engineering and Director of the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center. Thank you all for being here. Welcome. Dennis, let's start with you. Could you help us understand the big picture about this successful arrangement?
Yeah, thanks, Ann. Sure. So it is, what happened was a convergence of ideas and opportunities that came in fusion. So I won't go into the technical details of it, but our MIT team that had a history of propelling fusion forward through advances in magnetic field technology and fusion science had realized that there was a new opportunity, a very exciting opportunity in front of us that allowed for a scientific breakthrough in magnets that was going to increase the performance of fusion by a lot, like by factors of 20 to 50 by the rules of physics that we knew. So this came around at a very interesting time in fusion itself because there were some challenges around the timelines of what was coming in the public sector funded program. And what happened was our team had this great technical idea, but we didn't really, and you could see the impact this would have on fusion science. But we realized we didn't really have a place to take it. And what happened was we looked around and the natural place, like again, for something that is like a factor of 20, in 20-fold improvement of performance to cost, you take this to industry partners. There is no fusion industry. So what we realized is we looked around and the appetite for the risk of this wasn't there in the public sector, nor did it match with the timelines that we thought were appropriate. So what we did was we started to cast around and started to discuss it within the leadership at MIT and then to partners around at MIT, like what does this look like? And in some sense, what happened was we had to help ourselves launch a new energy industry and think about the partnerships that naturally occur in energy industries. You just heard those in the solar panel that were before, but what we had to do was pull those partners like further back, earlier on into the technology. And really what happened was a lot of this then happened through the structures that we have at MIT, like the Energy Initiative, the involvement that comes through this, and also launching a spin-out company, which is Commonwealth Fusion. So and now we're well into this exercise. And in fact, I think we could rightly claim that we have launched a nascent industry through this effort.
Thank you, Dennis. Max, let me come to you now. Following that, what led you to invest in such a high-risk initiative?
Yeah, thanks. And the key words are pace and commercialization, I would say. I still remember it was October 2016 when during the MIDI External Advisory Board, Dennis and Bob showed up holding a piece of HTS tape in their hands saying, this thing is going to change the world. And then that time the MIDI External Advisory Board was chaired by the late Secretary Schultz. And I remember they started outlining this project, which was certainly high risk. But on the other hand, in terms of risk profile, capital exposure, timeline, it somewhat matched the usual oil and gas projects risk profile timelines we were and we are still used to. So we said this is certainly a high risk initiative, but this is the kind of risk we are used to, we are familiar with, we can handle. And that resonated a lot with us, and that's why we decided to look into it and eventually to invest in the project and in CFS, the spin-out company. And we are very happy and proud to have done so.
Thank you, Max. Bob, you're a former MIT PhD student who launched Commonwealth Fusion Systems. What do you see about your startup that needed to be so unique?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, around the time that Dennis was talking about, where fusion was looking at like, okay, are we going to be relevant for climate change? We had this new magnet technology that looked really disruptive, but so disruptive that we couldn't really get the sort of government program to want to move quickly on it. We took a look at where all the other energy technologies came from. And it was clear that if you wanted this to go, you needed to be able to commercialize it. And if you wanted it to fit the market, you needed to be able to do that very quickly. But at the same time, if you're going to be successful technically, you needed to be able to get the talent. You need to be able to scale it up fairly quickly. You need to be able to get the capital to be able to scale it. And so those were all, really competing priorities, frankly. And we realized that, well, you could do this if you were very thoughtful and you launched a company so that it eventually became a commercial entity. And that company, was very ambitious, was at the right scale that it could actually be able to advance the technology, even in light of a field that has existed for 60 years. And also was able to attract talent from across all sorts of different disciplines outside academia, all the way up through manufacturing and commercialization experience to pull that earlier. But really importantly, if you were able to do that with a series of partners, chiefly being the scientists that were closest to the technology at a place like MIT. And so we were very, very thoughtful in starting the company in a way that was big enough to get the capital, big enough to get the set of partners, any breakthrough, others that would be able to see it through, be able to attract the talent from SpaceX and other places and pull them into the MIT ecosystem much earlier than would normally be possible. At which point we actually became, for a while, one of the largest private sponsors of research at MIT on this joint project to develop these magnets as quickly as possible to then kick off the next stage of demonstrating fusion energy.
Thank you so much for that. This is a good transition to ask Libby a question. Could you tell us a little bit about how can innovators pursue additional opportunities like this? What does it take to do something like this?
Yeah, well, I'm an investor at Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and maybe I'll just start off with a little bit about BEV. Breakthrough Energy Ventures is a venture capital fund that was established by Bill Gates and a number of other business leaders from around the world to invest in early stage technologies that can scale to make a massive impact on carbon emissions, to address climate change, and that can also scale to be a very valuable company and a very valuable investment. And we got involved in this project because we see the opportunity to do both of those things. And in addition to my role as an investor out of the fund, I've also had the great opportunity to help with a class at MIT called the Climate Energy Ventures course. And that's just one example out of many that you've already heard about today through the other panels about how innovators can get involved in directly into technologies that are coming out of lab and bring students from MIT and other universities and also bring in advisors from leading companies from around the world to formulate an actual venture around promising technologies and to take the very first initial formative steps that are required to bring a technology out of the lab. So for example, what's the technical differentiation? How big is the market? How do you quantify that? How do you show a techno-economic analysis to the company to convince your own self that this has merit commercially, and then to bring others around the company, whether it's employees, advisors, or eventually investors. And we've had a lot of great companies come out of that class as well. So there are plenty of opportunities building on the work that CFS has pioneered in taking technologies out of MIT, and that many other companies have done as well to get involved in early stage technologies and help take some very formative steps out of lab and into commercialization.
Thank you so much for that. Dennis or Bob, do you want to give an MIT perspective maybe to follow on Libby's comments about these interactions?
Well, I would start off with it's how interesting to me as an academic, how much this changed me. I mean, it's the point of interaction, right? It's an engagement. It means it changes all the parties involved. And I find it fascinating as an academic by the fact that we embarked, as Bob said, on a pretty difficult technical endeavor at a rapid pace. And the great technical expertise and scientific expertise of MIT came to play in this. But in the end, for example, we ended up making technical decisions based on looking much further ahead than we normally would, in terms of technical decisions that said, this looks like a better way to go, because even though it might have a different risk profile scientifically, this is going to have an impact about how we make the eventual fusion, power plants. I find that incredibly exciting to do that. And at the same time, our engagement with NE has been spectacular. As pointed out in the solar one, they're a real partner. I mean, we're doing research alongside NE scientists on aspects which have to do with heat transfer and materials, which are themselves going to be, we hope, transformative, in fact, in fusion. So our research portfolio got larger, not smaller. We're actually going into areas where I get more and more excited, in fact, by what we're doing because of this engagement with a different set of players than just the usual set of players that were just inside academia and a public-only supported research program. I'm thrilled by that. I think that's the sign of healthy engagement. All sides get modified by the engagement.
Yeah, I'd add to that it's really an ecosystem, and looking at it, before it was ecosystem as a prior life as an academic, was very much publishing, thinking about where to go as a professor or a national lab, something like that. But if you look at the broader ecosystem for something like energy or climate, it takes all the people that are on this panel, right? Like, you can have the best idea, but if you can't get that idea out of the lab and funded, then it's not going to be able to accelerate. And then that great idea, if you can't get that idea to fit into a market, people aren't going to buy it. And even if it did fit in the market, if you can't get that idea to scale, to be replicated over and over again, it's not going to make the difference on the things that we care about, access to energy or the climate. And the convening power of something like MIT, plus the willingness to lower barriers, to try things out, try out relationships. This is a big success of this program, where me as an entrepreneur, the options in front of me are so much bigger, because I can go in the same day, in the same hour, I can go to MIT colleagues, say, hey, what do you think about this alloy? But I can also go to E&I and say, would this work out in the field? And I can also go and look at the techno-economics and say, would this be a market winner? And the ability to do that rapidly with a set of people that are always on the same page, because they're always talking, they're always interacting, is super, super powerful. It's truly an accelerant.
No, thank you for that. These are excellent points, and maybe this is a great place to come back to Max and Libby and ask them to say a few words about the breadth of investment and what's important for them as they look across this nascent industry. Max, for example, I know there's also work happening that you're involved with the ARC fusion reactor.
Yeah, so let's say our involvement with fusion is pretty broad. Here, other than investing in CFS, we also launched a research program with the Plasma Science Fusion Center directed by Dennis. Two separate things, although intertwined, but two separate things. One is an equity investment, and the other is a research program, which is focused, by the way, on de-risking some of the components which will eventually end up in the industrial arc reactor. So let's say a pretty broad involvement on our side. And after participating in the SPARC project with CFS and Plasma Science Fusion Center, we also decided to get involved in other fusion projects in Europe. That is something that is taken care by our headquarters in Milan. But so here it's about giving birth to a new industry. Fusion industry is not there yet, or it has just born, and it is about to grow in an industry, not just a project.
Yeah, thank you. Libby, do you want to add to that about how you think about the breadth of investment?
Yeah, absolutely. Breakthrough Energy invests in anything across the economy that can have a dramatic reduction on carbon emissions and address climate change. We divide that scope up into 5 different areas: electricity, transportation, manufacturing, buildings and the built environment, and food and ag. And when we got the fund started, it was actually quite hard to find investors who were willing to invest in these areas. And we took a different approach to the fund and to building the team. And we built the team out of folks who have deep science and technology experience, as well as deep operating experience in the industry, so that we could evaluate things that build on years and years, decades of scientific research. And MIT is a great embodiment of that kind of growing body of knowledge that's developed through academic research. And it's that kind of confluence that was really important to us as we thought about engaging with CFS, and it continues to be important to us as we invest in other companies across our scope. So roll forward to today, and you see that a lot more investment is coming into all sectors of the economy that are impacting climate change. And that's a huge positive outcome of the last few years of really groundbreaking work of innovators and entrepreneurs to show that really special fundamental scientific breakthroughs can have a huge market opportunity. And so to take the example of CFS and the electricity sector generally, so today there are, if you think about the overall magnitude of the installed capacity of electricity, and you were to turn all of that over to carbon-free electricity generation, that represents trillions of dollars of investment potential. And so true breakthrough technologies that can produce electricity with 0 carbon emissions and that can be dispatchable and baseload really do have the opportunity to solve problems that are not addressed yet with a huge economic prize.
That's fantastic to hear. We're just a few minutes away now from the Q&A session for both panels. So perhaps this is a good point to ask for some vision and what you're thinking about horizons. And so maybe Dennis, we come to you for maybe a comment on that.
Well, the horizon comes to, and the vision comes in, we need to continue to execute. I think Bob said it very well. We need to be open to different kinds of relationships and to try these out. And this was a unique relationship for MIT in many ways to pull a startup so close to what we were doing. And I think we've seen this bear fruit. So we actually need more engagement, not less. The way I look at it right now is if we look at the full ecosystem that actually takes to deliver a new energy industry, it is large, and it's going to require more technical innovations and more organizational innovations as well too. So as the director of the PSFC, I'm very excited about not just the next generation of technology breakthroughs, but actually the next generation of organizational innovations that'll actually allow this to happen. And MIT's been at the forefront of these before, when we've been at the forefront of starting new industries. The fact that this could have one that has an impact on climate change, I think, is then doubly going to attract young talent to this as well too. And of course, as an educator, I get thrilled by that as well too.
Thanks for that. Max or Libby, would you like to have the final word about horizons?
Sure, I'll offer my perspective. And I think now is a great time to get involved in innovation that can address climate change. There's so much more interest than there was just a few years ago. I think investors and innovators alike are seeing both the scientific opportunity as well as the financial opportunity. And it doesn't just stop at electricity generation. We're now turning to the kind of sectors that are very, very tough to decarbonize, like industrial sectors, long haul transportation. And we've done a lot of work collectively across this community, but we have so much more work left to do. So from here, we're turning to the tougher and tougher challenges to solve. And we need everyone we can and all the bright minds around the table thinking about how to bring solutions, both from technology, business model, and financial models to bear.
That's a fantastic outlook. Thank you so much, Dennis, Max, Bob, and Libby for being part of this panel. Let's bring everyone back now, please, for the Q&A session. And I've divided it up into questions that have come in. We'll start with a few for the solar panel, and then also for the fusion collaboration panel. So this first question we had came in is really asking, I think it's a question for Eni. What would be recent examples where Eni is monetizing or accelerating this innovation coming from MAT for your energy transition services?
Well, the photovoltaic flagship project is certainly one of the examples. Here we are developing processes for coding and for materials to produce flexible and very light solar cells. So this is certainly a clear path to industrialization. Other, I would say, other pretty interesting initiatives were the ones that were also mentioned before, the parabolic concentrators. So parabolic concentrators that we also designed here at MIT, are in the process of being installed also in some of our facilities and sites in Italy. So this is something that is certainly worth mentioning.
Actually, if I can highlight one other thing that is important to recognize with any hard tech technology, it takes a decade to build the technology from scratch and scale it so that 1 million people can use it. It has never been an example of history of humanity that we have started with a new material and grew it in less than a decade. Even simple things like strained silicon took 13 years to commercialize. And this is a niche, call it, element of advancing electronics in a dramatic way. Zippers took 12 years, I believe, in the beginning of the 20th century, and Velcro about 13, because no one knew how to handle plastics and extrude small polymer fibers. Computers about 15, and thank goodness we had the Apollo mission to indeed advertise the value of computers. So don't expect that when we invent something that is done, innovation is done. When we invent something, there's a decade of a journey, at least a decade-long journey ahead of us. And in the case of fusion, for example, Dennis can tell you multiple steps along that way, step technology opportunities, each one of them taking a significant amount of time. Remarkable thing about the nuclear, to me, observing Dennis's work and his team's work, is just how rapidly they are able to benefit from the co-technologies, advancements of the co-technologies, and recognize also financial challenges and scale-up challenges that had not previously been considered, but with a tremendous opportunity of impact.
Thank you so much for that. This is another question for the solar panelists. When you're thinking about these ultralight solar cells, we had someone ask us, are you also imagining solar power coming from satellites?
Sure. And I don't mean to take over the air here. My colleagues can reply to this as well. To send something to low Earth orbit, it's anywhere between $20,000 a kilo and $5,000 a kilo, depending who you ask. So coming up with a lighter solar cell, you can send more solar watts into low Earth orbit if that's what you wish. And indeed, there are some projects presently on a niche, small scale, being considered to do exactly that. But it's still cheaper to build stuff on Earth than sending it up there.
So Vladimir, there's also the issue of low lighter elements have less susceptibility to radiation damage in space. They have an advantage there also.
Yeah, so maybe just to jump in with the perovskites, we've actually seen that perovskites can be something like 4 or 5 times as radiation hard, to Tim's point, as a conventional space technology. So that's actually they're kind of self-healing in some ways. So it's in some ways a benefit for space technologies. But I think for the purpose of this discussion, I mean, if you're sending solar into space, you're not reducing carbon emissions. So it may be a good stepping stone on the way to large scale on the Earth on deployment terrestrially, but it's certainly not the long-term thing if your goal is climate.
Joel, with that, a follow-on question. What do folks on this panel think that next big push could be for climate applications? We heard a little bit about the horizon for these very, very ultralight technologies. And anything else that Joel or Miles you want to add?
From solar, you mean specifically? Yeah, I think from us, I mean, we're very excited about delivering kind of the next generation of higher efficiency and more affordable terrestrial solar. I mean, lightweight might be very helpful for deploying on things like, large flat, box store kind of roofs where you maybe can't put heavy solar. But at the same time, if you can just make a solar panel more efficient, more affordable, and just as durable, I think that alone actually, because we're relying on solar so much to fix the climate problem, right? We're imagining tens of percents, maybe 50% of our energy coming from solar down the line. Anything you can do to improve that, make it better, make it more efficient, more affordable, I think that's going to make a big impact.
I guess in our case, we're really inspired by leveraging building materials that are already being used. So there's a concept of lightweight where you have a lightweight substrate and it's flexible. In our case, we're trying to actually leverage substrates that are already being adopted, like the glass of a building. And so the net weight added is negligible, and you kind of already have installation happening. You already have structural systems to house windows, and really just kind of making better use of the surface and the materials that we're going to use for infrastructure and buildings, and leveraging those as an energy generating resource in addition to all the other things they do. They provide light to a building, the aesthetics, the comfort that we're all familiar with, but making those kind of an energy resource in addition to just something you have to install.
All right, thank you very much. A question came in for the fusion panel, actually, thinking about how does one manage uncertainties which are bound to come about during disruptive technical progress at CFS?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it goes to the heart of what it means to be an entrepreneur. You're always going to have uncertainties. The best thing is you have a strategy. You don't have a rigid plan that's very fragile. You have a strategy, and then you have the ability to constantly reassess and pivot when the time is right. And that sort of strategy, and it's something like fusion is very technical and based in hard science, and most of climate as well, where the market is there. We know the market is there. It's whether or not you can deliver a solution to that market. That type of uncertainty is managed the same way that the MIT teaches people how to do science. It's hypothesis testing. Like you have a hypothesis that this is going to be valuable, or this is going to be useful, or this is going to work this way, and you run the experiment. And the goal is to get that experiment run as quickly and cleanly as possible so that you can make the next hypothesis. And that's certainly what we've been doing.
And I can add on to that from an investor perspective as well. I think, as Bob mentioned, thinking about each round of investment as an experiment, and you can kind of sequentially retire risks. That's one aspect of it. And in addition to that, as investors, we also think about kind of going back to the whole ecosystem concept, bringing an ecosystem around each company that has a diversity of skills and resources to help the companies through the inevitable challenges that they'll face. So it's something that we plan for in advance, and is a core part of how we help these companies go through an activity that we called company building, and it has to do with building a really robust ecosystem around each company.
Right. Part of it is also having the strength of your convictions. And I think, you know, from the opposite side, what is interesting is that science is often, I'm not going to say risk adverse because we go explore things, but from a project point of view, from an execution point of view, I can see how it's changed our MIT team about being willing to accept more risk with the understanding that if we wait around for the perfect solution, that's not going to really help anybody for fusion energy. So I think it's been another interesting aspect of the interactions through the collaborations.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question on fusion. Are the folks on this panel as fusion developers, are you envisioning 100% financing from investors? And if you are, is that what you desire? Does your appetite exist? And if not, are you instead placing emphasis on financing in some other way as you plan your future pilot and commercial scale plants?
Yeah, I can take that one. It's a really good question. It's something that comes up a lot in a technology development roadmap. What, independent of what the technology is like, what is the role of all the different players and at what stages? So in our case, we as a company, we are equity financed through investors, but the technology that we're building on has been billions of dollars by the Department of Energy and the equivalents around the world, and has built up the skill sets and the infrastructure and the techniques that are at a place like MIT or at the national labs that we work with closely. And so the line, sort of isn't as clean often as it maybe is portrayed of like, oh, a company just comes out of nowhere, gets investor money and goes. No, it's always based on this bigger, broader ecosystem that goes way back. And then going forward, it's also clear that it's not always the best thing to do to just take investor money, that there's roles to play for government. And so, for instance, we apply for government grants, and we're pretty successful at getting them, and we want to see more participation by government in research and R&D funding, either directly to us or to partners like at MIT. And then eventually, as technologies enter the market, what's the role of society in helping them get through early learnings through things like tax incentives or loan guarantees, and those are all on the table in our view.
And actually, what was interesting about building a broader ecosystem is that the beginnings of the project were supported by philanthropy, because there was somebody who was interested about the impact this could have in the world, and very generously that supported a very nascent effort that was actually able then to expand and grow. So it is, it's almost never going to be through just one pathway.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I have a question here, which is a great follow-up, which is Eni has mentioned in the past that they've done technical assessments of these projects. And Max, maybe you want to say a few words about how important were these technical assessments for attracting other investors?
Well, for sure, they were very important to attract our investments because although fusion is certainly a pretty complicated topic, so we have great researchers in our headquarters who carried out a thorough due diligence, technical due diligence on the Spark project. And at the end, we were all convinced that this project, although it is certainly very challenging, it was certainly doable. We had a lot of faith also in the capabilities of the researchers who were carrying out this project, but certainly the technical assessment of the Spark project and the assessment of the technology was a key driver in our decision to invest in the fusion project.
Yeah, thank you.
And how much other investors might have relied on our technical investments, our investment decision, that I don't know. I cannot speak for other people, but for sure, but I would say that in every investment that we make, also in ENI Next, the technical assessment is a key component. We certainly look at the team, we certainly look at the market, we certainly look at the potential, but we want to understand the fundamentals of the technology. And although maybe we are not able to understand every single detail, very technical detail, especially for a complex matter like fusion, but not only for fusion, we need to be comfortable of the feasibility, the technical feasibility, and the solidity of the technology.
Thank you for that. One last question about fusion, and then we'll come back to some of the more general questions that I'm seeing here. What are the ambitions for the fusion project beyond the initial commercial reactor?
I don't know if I can just say something about that. So for us, we talk about fusion for electricity generation, but the potential of fusion is such that it's not limited just to electricity generation. Fusion can play a huge role in decarbonization that goes well beyond electricity generation. You can use fusion also to make hydrogen. You can make many different uses of such an incredible and concentrated source of power, so that which go much beyond the energy generation.
Yeah, I likewise. It's, we got to get the first one built and working, but the potential here is to displace huge amounts of carbon, but also to make energy in a new form factor that you could build lots of places, expand access to do things like desalinate, or people work on direct air capture for carbon, for instance. That's a very energy intensive thing. If you had an energy source like fusion, maybe that would become more feasible. And if we get better at this, it should get lower cost, as almost all energy technologies do. And so that could really open up energy intensive things that we don't do today because of the societal and ecological impact.
No, thank you. So let me come to some bigger questions. This one was directed at Libby originally, but I think it also would be interesting to hear maybe from the panelists on the solar energy group. For you, Libby, there are hundreds of long-term energy storage startups, thousands of bright folks working on competing chemistries and technologies. Wouldn't it be better if they all got together and shared IP and the technical challenges? Could that get us to a low-cost LTS sooner?
That is a really great question. And we think about different approaches, complementarity of approaches, and where we see some synergy, we do think about at least bringing teams together. And there's a beautiful thing in, in competitive environments where there is something to be gained from winning that competition. And when you have markets working with a really large economic prize, you tend to see different groups pushing each other. So there are times that I think collaboration and open sharing of IP is really important, certainly when there are pre-competitive conditions, and where just a very basic understanding of technology can advance a whole field. Absolutely, that is 100% an environment for combining forces and sharing IP. And then there are also environments where it just helps to have everyone kind of pushing their own approach forward, because at the end of the day, you need somebody to really believe. And when you have a breakthrough technology, they're going to be up against a tremendous force against that technology. And so you really need someone to believe, and often that just requires a very few dedicated people to push something forward instead of a big, broad consensus building type of process. And then there are things in the middle where you see a couple of groups have a similar approach, complementary skill sets or complementary resources. And we have, in some cases, kind of brought different parties together to combine forces and pursue the kind of the opportunities ahead. But I would also welcome other perspectives on this.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to have to wrap up soon. So actually, I saw Vladimir unmute for a moment. So perhaps, Vladimir, you want to have the last word on this topic of cooperation and competition.
Well, I will simply say that the fact that we have so many ideas and the fact that you can mesh them together indeed would benefit. But we also need to drive a technology. And to drive a technology, tremendous amount of investment is needed. If investment can still come in, if we merge our ideas, then let's do it, because that will move us forward. If investment will not come, if we merge the ideas, well, then unfortunately, we have to keep them separate until we can go ahead and build up the idea enough to capture the others down the line. It is all about driving just incredible amount of funding needed to redefine the planet as we need it. And whatever gets us there, from point of view of science, yes. From point of view of building a company from scratch, that depends on the investment parameters that we are faced with.
Thank you so much. And with that, we need to wrap up these sessions. So let me thank all the speakers for this fantastic discussion on solar energy research and fusion energy collaborations. I turn it over now to the Vice President of Research at MIT, Professor Maria Zuber.
Great, thank you so much, Anne. So I'd like to begin by expressing my thanks to Mighty Director Bob Armstrong, to our excellent speakers, and to the people who made today's event possible, especially Mighty's Kelly Horty. And thanks to you, our webinar audience. There were more than 400 of you who took the time to take part today, and we're greatly appreciative. In 2015, MIT began our program of action on climate change. We've accomplished a great deal thanks to the effort and commitment of literally thousands of people in our community. Nonetheless, we truly need to step up our game. We simply don't yet have the technologies we need to decarbonize our energy systems and our economy. We also need to develop ways to get new technologies ramped up and into broad use. We need strong, consistent public policies to provide the framework for technology, society, and markets to mesh sustainably. And we need all of this globally, not just in the US and the developed world, because greenhouse gas emissions anywhere will build up in the Earth's atmosphere that we all share. Today's forum was organized around a key concept that informed our first climate action plan: engagement with actors and entities outside of MIT. MIT is amazing. It has superb faculty, students, and staff and alums, and a strong culture of problem solving and service. But MIT can't solve climate change alone. We need the know-how, the resources, and the infrastructure of the private sector, the power of governments, the creativity of other academic institutions, and the grassroots energy of civil society to deal successfully with the climate crisis. Now, what I hope you all take away from today's forum is this: solving climate change is both challenging and exciting. It's going to require multiple advances. There will be no vaccine for climate change. You have no doubt heard the phrase, go big or go home. Well, when it comes to climate change, going big is imperative because the Earth is our home. Over the last several years, MIT has been launching institutions and programs to allow us to take on this complex and multifaceted problem. MITY's detailed studies of energy technology and uses have provided a roadmap to where future innovations are needed. MITY's low carbon energy centers have leveraged tens of millions of dollars in research funding into hundreds of millions of dollars invested in startup energy companies, some of which you've heard about today. MIT's Grand Challenges Initiative has elicited dozens of promising proposals from our faculty aimed at novel solutions to the world's most challenging climate problems. And our newest venture into this space, the MIT Climate and Sustainability Consortium, is establishing new collaborations with industry-leading firms working to adapt their businesses and supply chains into the decarbonizing world. Now, we've spent much of the last year seeking input and ideas for a new climate action plan, and today's forum is a continuation of this effort. My office will be co-hosting another forum exploring the possibilities for engagement on climate change, this one with the Environmental Solutions Initiative and its director, Professor John Fernandez, on Thursday, April 1st at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Time, I should say, for those of you in other places. If you would like to attend this event, just click the link in the blue announcement bar below the live stream window to register. You can also keep track of upcoming MIT climate events on the MIT resources section of our climate web portal, climate.mit.edu. Now, even after we announce a new plan later this spring, our need for new ideas and collaborations will continue. And I urge all of you to remain engaged with MIT in this critical effort. Thank you, and thanks for attending today. Bye-bye.